And all right, so thank you again, everyone. This will be our October Lunch and Learn on the Florida Horseshoe Crab Watch program, linked with Limulus. And we have Holly Abeels here from Florida Sea Grant Extension Agent with the University of Florida IFAS Extension Office, in Brevard County, and she has been there since 2010. She has a Master's of Science degree in Environmental Science from Florida Gulf Coast University, and her programs include teaching the Florida Master Naturalist Program, which is an excellent program. If you haven't done one before, highly recommend signing up. And she enjoys working with communities to address climate change and sea level rise, as well as working with volunteers on projects like Florida Horseshoe Crab Watch. So without further ado, Ms. Holly Abeels, please take it away.
Thanks so much, Nicole, and thank you for having me come speak today. I'm really excited to be talking with everyone here and to be talking to you about this program. So like Nicole said, I'm with the University of Florida IFAS Extension, and I help lead here in Brevard County the Florida Horseshoe Crab Watch program. I'm going to talk to you today about horseshoe crabs, which are a very exciting species, and basically what types of things we're looking at when we're asking citizen scientists to go out to monitor for the horseshoe crab. So I'll get right started. And like Nicole said, I do like to have more of a dialogue when I'm presenting and talking with people. So if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A, and Nicole will let me know that questions as we go along, but also take questions at the end too. All right, so let's just start off with talking about what horseshoe crabs are. So horseshoe crabs are arthropods. Even though they are called horseshoe crabs, they're not actually crabs, but they are crustaceans, so they're in with that same group. And they have three major body parts and jointed legs. This is a top portion and a bottom view portion of their body. And they do have their name, arthropod, is Greek, arthro meaning jointed, and pos meaning foot, so their name means jointed foot, so that hence why their name called in the arthropod group. So this is the family tree for arthropods. Horseshoe crabs have been around for millions and millions of years. As you can see, they are related to spiders, crustaceans, centipedes, and millipedes, insects, so they're within that same group, but they're their own lineage, their own line. So they've kind of split off millions of years ago from the other arthropods, and they're within their own lineage. But they are more closely related to arachnids than to the other group species within the arthropod group family tree. So they are really ancient. They've been around for hundreds of millions of years. The oldest fossil for arthropod, or for the horseshoe crab, was found in the Paleozoic. So 445 million years ago. That was before dinosaurs time. But we also see in the Jurassic, 215 million years ago or so, we have this Limulus species that looks pretty much exactly like our modern horseshoe crab. So they've had the same body type for hundreds of millions of years. And because they have this long lineage, they've survived many mass extinctions and climate change. So that could be important as we move forward within our world because of our changing climate. So because they've had that same body type for millions of years, they have these primitive traits, meaning that they're very similar in form to the ancestors. So they have these 5 pairs of legs, as you can see in this picture. Their mouth is actually within the base of these legs, and they kind of chew with the bases of those legs. It's kind of like scratchy a little bit, so they can chomp down on their food. They have this operculum and what are called book gills. So this is not like other marine arthropods, like crabs and stuff like that. They're actually more closely related, or kind of look like the gills or the breathing apparatus of arachnids. And they breathe in by taking in water through channels and circulating it over their gills. So even though they kind of have this hardened look to them. They're harmless, so they can't harm you. A lot of people often have questions about their tail and whether or not their tail can hurt people, because it's sort of similar to like a stingray, and we learn here in Florida, right, that we have to watch out for stingray tails. That's not the case with these. They do have that hardened shell because they want to be able to withstand predation. So they have to be able to have the skeleton, exoskeleton, so they can help keep predators off of them potentially. But they have all these other sensory abilities on that shell. So they have within their gills, they have these kind of they're able to sense chemicals with their gills. On their carapace or the shell, they have these kind of tactile, I guess, bodies that you could say that helps them to feel things like on their shell. They have several different types of eyes. They have like their compound eyes, which are extremely sensitive. So those are the eyes that you would see, that you think that they would see with, but they also have these median eyes, which are sensitive to UV light. They also have light bodies or eyes, both on their tail and underneath near their mouth. And the mouth one is important because sometimes they do end up upside down. They actually use their tail on their tail fin to help flip themselves back over when they do that. So if they are upside down, you know, kind of like that mouth ventral eye helps let them know, hey, I'm upside down. So they know that they need to flip themselves back over. And those kind of chemical cues are really important during mating season. So the males actually use those cues to help them find and locate females. So we have 4 living species in the world. We have the Limulus polyphemus here in North America, and then there's 3 species over in Asia. So they're pretty widely distributed within those areas, and I'll specifically be talking about our North American species. So you can find them all along the east coast of the United States, into the Gulf, and then along the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. So horseshoe crabs are very important ecologically. You can see this very simple food web that kind of shows where they sort of fall into the ecosystem and the things that they eat and things that eat them. So they feed mainly on shellfish and on worms, so mussels and clams and aquatic worms. And there's lots of different things that eat them and their eggs. So a lot of shorebirds rely on horseshoe crab mating when they're coming on shore to lay their eggs. A lot of shorebirds rely on those eggs actually as they're migrating from one place to another. And then there's lots of different things that eat them. So there could be different fish, especially when they're much younger. One of my colleagues has a picture of actually an alligator eating a horseshoe crab. So all within anything you could think of out there, you know, potentially that could be fed upon or that they are feeding. So, and there could be lots of other things besides what's in this food web that you can think of as well, part of their ecosystem. And I mentioned about how they are very important for shorebirds. So there's actually a threatened species of bird called the red knot that migrates from the southern tip of South America all the way to the Arctic, where their breeding grounds are. And they have timed their migration to stop actually in Delaware Bay around the time when horseshoe crabs are coming on shore and laying their eggs. And they feed upon all the eggs on the shore, and they usually double their weight within about 2 weeks by feeding on these horseshoe crab eggs. So they're very important ecologically for this bird, this threatened bird, in order for there to be a stopover so they can gather their resources, pump up, you know, and double their weight so that they can continue their migration into the Arctic. That's one of the many reasons why horseshoe crabs are managed in the Atlantic, is because of ecosystem services like this, where they're important for these shorebirds. So here in Florida, we have several different, you could say, populations, distinct populations, including here in the Indian River Lagoon. The further north that you go up the coast, the larger horseshoe crabs get. So we have kind of smaller individuals. Obviously it's warmer here, so they don't have to have as much stores to be able to store energy. And we do have some data as to what the populations look like here in Florida, except for in South Florida. We actually don't have a lot of data for populations there, but we have quite a bit of data for Gulf Coast and also here in the Southeast. So one of the important things about horseshoe crabs, and one of the reasons why we can have this Horseshoe Crab Watch program, is because we can actually go out when horseshoe crabs are on the beach spawning and count horseshoe crabs. So that's what this program, the Horseshoe Crab Watch program, does, is we go out when horseshoe crabs are on the beach laying their eggs and look at what males and female, how many males and females there are, the sizes of the individuals, how many there are, and stuff like that. So this is very unique for arthropods. So this is not typical at all for any type of marine organism except for maybe sea turtles. So, you know, normally animals don't come out of the water to lay their eggs. So this is very unusual. And is most likely because of what their ancestors did. So this is an adaptation that they've had for millions of years. So what exactly are they doing when you see them come up on the beach like this? So first off, a male and a female.
Holly, we got one question.
Yes, of course.
So I don't know if you're going to cover this soon, but how many eggs are laid by horseshoe crabs?
Great question, and I'm going to do that in my next slide.
Oh, so, awesome.
Great. Very good question. So first, before they get up on the beach, they have to find each other, right? So a male and a female have to find each other. Males have these modified front legs called claspers, or they kind of look like little boxing gloves. And they're actually holding on to the back of the female with these claspers and pairing up for the breeding season. So they pair up offshore. He'll hold on to her for several weeks. So he's not eating during this time. He's trying to ensure that he can mate, you know, with a female before they actually migrate to the beach to breed. So this is one way that he can kind of ensure that he's able to be part of the breeding process. So they pair up for about 1 to 3 weeks, and the female will drag the male up on shore. She'll lay her eggs in the sand, and she usually lays about like 2,000 eggs at a time. But what she'll do is she'll sort of stop, she'll lay some eggs, you know, about 2,000 eggs or so. The male will fertilize, and then she'll move forward. So each one of these flags is kind of a point where she's actually stopping and laying eggs and then continuing to move forward to lay more eggs. So she will do this until, you know, she's done laying eggs for that time, and then they'll go back in the water and potentially come back on shore, you know, within a day or two to lay more eggs. So usually within a week's time, that's all the egg laying that she'll do for the year. So it could be about, you know, 60,000 eggs a year that, you know, she's laying eggs. Males will return repeatedly during the breeding season. So even if the female is done laying, he can, you know, grab onto another female or just even come up on shore, you know, to try to mate. And one important thing with this type of breeding is that the eggs are fertilized externally as they're being laid, which is very unusual. And you would think would not be very successful, right? Because there's lots of water, there's sand, there's all types of things going on. But for these horseshoe crabs is a very successful way to breed. So in this program, we're actually asking citizen science to go out when horseshoe crabs are coming on shore to breed in order to count the individuals and the number of males and females and how they're paired together. So this could be a potential site that you might see if you go out on the beach. So you see a female. This female is actually very much buried in the sand. You know, they do bury in so she can, you know, lay her eggs underneath the sand. So they'll continue to be wet and not too hot, right? So if they were on the surface, they might get too hot. And she has an attached male, and similar with this other one coming on shore. And then you also will see unattached males, so just males that are just coming up on the beach, not attached to any females. And they're looking for a mating pair. So you see a female down in this right corner with an attached male, and then what we call satellite males. And satellite males are males that are not attached, and they're trying to get in to also fertilize those eggs. And they're pretty successful. So it's not like this is, they're not getting anything out of it. They actually can be pretty successful in fertilizing some of the eggs that the female is laying. And I've seen a female with an attached male and like a bunch of satellites. So she could be like completely covered with satellites potentially, depending on how many males and females there are. So it can be quite a sight. All right, so they lay their eggs. Eggs are fertilized. The male and female go back into the water. And the eggs develop, they stay as eggs for about 2 to 3 days. And then they turn into an embryo. They stay within the sand for about 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the temperature. Sort of similar like with sea turtles, not necessarily that, you know, sex would change, but, you know, depending on how warm it is will depend on, you know, how soon development occurs. So if it's warmer, it might only take 2 weeks. If it's colder, it might take 4 weeks. And then they emerge from the sand as larvae. They look, and this is called a trilobite larvae, so called because they sort of look like the trilobite fossil. If you've ever seen a fossil, it has the same body shape. And they don't feed. They are free swimming. They could stay within the sand, so they could be little larvae within the sand and not having washed out yet within that time. And then they metamorphose into these little juvenile horseshoe crabs in about 1 to 4 weeks, again, depending on temperature. And that's like, I think, the cutest thing ever, the little baby, the little metamorphosed juvenile horseshoe crab. So he looks just like a horseshoe crab, but he's little. So, and then he'll continue to look like that for like the rest of his life, except for getting bigger. And just like other arthropods, in order to get bigger, they have to molt. The juveniles, once they get to that stage where they look like little horseshoe crabs, they live out on the mudflats in shallow water near, you know, where it is that they came, the beach they came from, feeding on worms and mollusks and other things that they can find. They'll molt about 16 to 17 times over 9 to 10 years. So that's, you know, the first couple of years they're molting a lot, and then it kind of slows down, you know, as the years progress. And when they reach that 9 to 10 years is actually when they're full size, and that's when they actually begin to be able to breed and reproduce. Oftentimes people will find molts, you know, on the beach, and they'll think that they are dead horseshoe crabs, but molts are very like pliable. You can kind of move them around quite a bit. And you can't necessarily see, they're not necessarily like translucent, but they're pretty, you can see pretty clearly, you know, through them. And the juveniles molt basically by their hinge. So like the very front of their shell sort of splits open. They crawl out and then they fill themselves with water in order to make themselves bigger. And so you can see I have here just in my office, like all different sizes of molted horseshoe crabs, because you know I can see them, especially on the beaches where they are nesting, because they are so close, living just right in the water. And so when they do that final molt after about 9 to 10 years, that's when they actually begin to breed. This is also, that final molt is when the males get their claspers. So you actually can't tell males from females before that final molt, because they don't need the claspers until they start reproducing. And they'll live 6 to 8 more years as adults. Their total lifespan could be 15 to 20 years. And once they do that, once they have that final molt, that's when they start reproducing, and they don't ever molt again. So oftentimes, and this is one thing that we do within the program also, is that we will determine like how young or old the horseshoe crab is based on the condition of its shell. And so very young individuals, you know, ones that may only be had their last molt within a year or two, have a very shiny shell, and it's often very slimy as well. Medium, so individuals that are like middle of the, I guess, adult lifespan, they oftentimes have darker portions of their shell. It's not as shiny. Maybe they have 1 or 2 barnacles or other things that are stuck to the shell. And then an older individual has, you know, lots of things stuck to it. So either lots of barnacles or like other kind of encrusting bryozoan. Their shell's usually very dark. There's some wear and tear, so you know that they have been through a lot, you know, during their time. And this actually helps us to have a better understanding of basically how the population is, whether there's more young individuals, more older individuals. So if we see a lot of young, then we know that the population is continuing to reproduce, and there's more individuals kind of getting into the reproducing ages of the horseshoe crab. If there's more older individuals, then that could be a sign that there's not a lot of individuals breeding, and so that could be harmful to the population. So it's basically a measure of the health of the population and whether or not there are more newer individuals coming into the system for breeding. So when do they come ashore to breed? So if you are in the northern states on the East Coast, obviously the water doesn't get very warm until later, either in the spring or in the summer. And so they'll be breeding later in the year. So they need this kind of increase in water temperature in order to stimulate like the production of eggs and sperm. Here in Florida, of course, we're very lucky that it's warm pretty much year round. So on the Gulf Coast, they have these 2 breeding seasons, like a February to May timeframe, and then an August to October timeframe. So they have 2 seasons. We have found mainly in our area, there's like a December to say April, which is like the larger breeding season. And then we do have a smaller one, you know, around this time of year. And then we're not really sure about South Florida, like when they opportunistically come up to breed. So this is important because this lets us know when we can send volunteers out to look for horseshoe crabs when they're coming ashore to breed. And so during that time frame, during those months when they want to come ashore to breed, they spawn during the new or full moon. And so that's when the tides are the highest. So that means when the water will be furthest up on the shoreline. So they want to nest basically at the top of that high tide line. It helps to make sure that their eggs aren't inundated with water constantly, so the eggs can't be drowning, you know, with water all the time. So if it's at the highest tide and they go all the way up the beach to that high tide line, then their eggs will be able to be exposed to air and not dry out and not be inundated with water at the same time. So it's usually about 2 days before and 2 days and up to 5 days after the high tide. And that would be like a week-long time when citizens are going out during this program to do the surveying of the horseshoe crabs. And this can occur either day or night, so it just depends on when high tide is. We do typically have 2 high tides a day, so those would be the times when they would be coming up on shore. So this is for majority of sites where they are breeding. We in the lagoon like to be different. So as you know, in our Minerva Lagoon, at least our portion, we don't have tides. We have more of a wind-driven system. And so most of the spawning that we have seen, or when they're coming on shore to breed, has more to do with onshore wind. So when it's very windy and the water's being pushed up on shore, that's when they're more likely going to come on shore to breed. And the temperature of the water has to be right as well. So it's not necessarily predictable in advance. We kind of have to pay attention to storms and wind events, and have volunteers going out, during those wind events to see if horseshoe crabs are coming on shore to breed. We also have large mass spawning events where we'll see thousands to 10,000 individuals, up on shore at once, breeding during this mass spawning. Nicole, I saw you unmute. I didn't know if you had a question. There was a question that popped up.
There was a question, but you answered it right away.
Okay.
The question was, will they breed in the lagoon or just on the beach?
Okay.
And
Yeah.
then we do have one question right here. Says, how deep can they survive, and how do they control their buoyancy? That might be something that we touch on later on.
Yeah, horseshoe crabs live in estuaries, so they'll live as deep, as the estuary is. Our Indian Lagoon isn't, too terribly deep, so it's mainly a shallow estuary. But they do live in estuaries. They can live offshore, so we have seen spawning of crabs in New Smyrna Beach that we know are Georgia crabs, because they're so much bigger than the crabs here in Florida, like really so much bigger. So like a dinner plate size to like a platter size, like huge difference. So that tells us that obviously they're traveling, within the ocean. So probably not very deep, probably more shallow along the coastline. But they are, traveling within, I guess you could say, like ocean or like the Gulf. And the Gulf is pretty shallow here in our area. What was the second question?
How do they control their buoyancy?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure if they have to have that ability, because they are a species that lives on the bottom. So they're what would be called a benthic species, so living on the bottom. So they might, they're always, I guess, heavier than the water. So they're going to be sinking to the bottom. They might, if there is like a strong storm, might get roughed up, within waves if they're too shallow water. But they, for the most part, they're heavy as far as being able to sink in water. But good question. Hi, so I'm talking to you about horseshoe crabs and how wonderful they are. Hopefully you've already gotten excited about horseshoe crabs and want to see one yourself if you haven't. So why exactly do we have this horseshoe crab watch program? Like, why are we doing this, right? Besides that horseshoe crabs are amazing and cool and, we want to study them. So main reason is because they are a managed species. So they're managed by the Atlantic Marine Fisheries Commission, which is mainly like the central portion of the eastern United States on the coast, like the Virginia, Delaware, Maryland area-ish. So that commission, that Federal Fisheries Management Commission, they have a plan to regulate horseshoe crabs because they are harvested, so they have to be managed in order to make sure we're not taking more individuals, out of the population. So there's several different, I guess, components of their management and regulation. So there is a harvest for bait, so they're actually used in the whelk and eel fishery for bait. So fishermen will harvest them and use them for bait, kind of like you would do with, say if you're a fisherman and you go out and cast net for like shrimp, before going out, to fish for the day or something like that. So very similar, so they're harvested for bait. And since 2001, the harvest has been around 1 million per year within those areas where they do bait harvest. So this is mainly the mid-Atlantic, not necessarily in Florida. There is a biomedical harvest, which I'll go into more detail. This is not done in Florida. It's, again, mid-Atlantic states like Maryland, Virginia, Carolinas. But in Florida, the aquarium trade is a significant harvest for horseshoe crabs. So people like to harvest them when they're young and little. And so that is another way where they are harvested. So this is a multi-stakeholder process. There's lots of different people involved in the management and in, you know, potential harvest of horseshoe crabs along their range. So like I said, they're harvested by trawl or by hand for the whelk and eel fishery. In the 90s, this fishery expanded, the whelk fishery expanded, and so horseshoe crab numbers were starting to decline, and usually at that point is when management has to step in and start looking at the population and what that looks like for the, you know, the long haul of the fishery. And then here in Florida, the aquarium trade is also another way where they're targeted, and usually they're targeted when they're juveniles, so when they are smaller, and then they go into the aquarium trade. You know, similar for other species of fish and stuff like that would go into the aquarium trade. And of course, this could be detrimental because they're obviously they don't start breeding or reproducing until they're much older. So you're taking out individuals that would no longer be able to be part of the breeding population.
We had a question that came in. Is there a season to harvest the horseshoe crabs, or are they protected during mating?
Well, that's a good question. I actually don't know the answer to that. In at least the biomedical industry, the horseshoe crabs are harvested or returned back to the water live, so they aren't kept alive during that process. So I'm not sure if it would matter for that particular harvest. But the other two, like the aquarium harvest and then for the bait fishery, I'm not sure if there's a season. I have to look into it. But good question.
And your mic was a little garbly, so I don't know if you need to move a little bit closer. Maybe it's just on my end.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so I'm not sure if there is a harvest time frame, like if there's only certain times of the year that they would be harvested. Because the bait fishery is mainly, they're harvested for that in our northern states. And they would only be coming to shore to breed during like summertime or like late spring, early summer. Potentially, there might only be limitations for, you know, harvesting not like in late spring or early summer, but I don't know if there is any restrictions. I can look into that and get back with you. So like I was saying with the aquarium trade, you know, if juveniles are taken out of the population for this particular harvest, obviously they're not being able to breed yet because they are younger, they're below the breeding age. And so that could have an impact on potentially new populations that would already be stressed because there maybe isn't enough breeding occurring already, or you know, maybe there's other factors that have harm to the population, like all the things that humans do, right, to our marine environments and stuff like that. Things like development and pollution and things like that can obviously have an impact on these species. All right, and so another reason why they are regulated is because of the economic importance of their blood. So horseshoe crabs are wild collected and they are transported to a lab, and there's I believe there's 4 or 5 companies, so they're in like the Virginia, Carolinas area.
Holly, do you mind turning off your mic really quick and then turning it back on to see if that helps with the static?
It does say I'm having like technical difficulties, so I'm gonna plug in my headphones, see if that helps.
Okay, perfect, yeah.
How's that? Is that better?
It's good on my end.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, I just looked up and it said, your audio is not working very well. And then you told me, so.
Sometimes it was totally fine, and then it just, that last little bit, seems like it was having some issues, but it seems like, that sounds like it's going good.
Okay, great. Thank you for letting me know. So another reason why horseshoe crabs are managed is because of our harvest for their blood. And so the horseshoe crabs are collected wild and kept alive during this process and returned live. So there is, of course, a percentage that dies during this process, but they are kept alive and returned live. They're brought back to the lab, and as long as they're kept, so horseshoe crabs can stay out of the water for long periods of time. So as long as they're kept cool and their gills are kept wet, you know, they can stay out of the water for the couple days it would take for this process to occur, even though they do try to return them, you know, as soon as possible. So they're brought to the lab, they're scraped clean, kind of like given an antiseptic sort of to make sure they're clean. Their heart is punctured and about a third to a half of their blood is removed. So you can see in this middle picture, their blood is blue, and that's because instead of hemoglobin that carries oxygen through the blood, it's hemocyanin. And so that means that copper is the carrier for that oxygen. Those blood cells or amoebocytes are removed and then broken open or lysed, so they're kind of spun down. And they are bottled into this product, I guess you could say, that's called Limulus amoebocyte lysate, or LAL. So that's the final product that comes out of this process. And again, there's, I think, 5 companies that do this type of harvest and production of this LAL. So what is this? Why is this done? So this test is for somewhere, somehow, I'm sure there's history on this that that you could look up, or I could look up to say how exactly this happened. But it was kind of figured out that this, their blood in this product is really sensitive to the presence of gram-negative bacteria. And this is the type of bacteria that would cause infections and disease. So it's this test that they use with this LAL is very sensitive to the presence of this bacteria. So this has been used as a standard for testing all injectables since 1987. So if you've ever had anything injected into you, anything implanted, they would use this in order to make sure that the product didn't have bacteria that could cause infection or disease. And as you can imagine, because this is the biomedical industry, it's $1 billion industry. So a lot of money goes into this. A lot of money is produced or brought in because of this. And so it's a very large industry. So they want to make sure that there is obviously enough horseshoe crabs to be in the population so that they can be harvested for their blood for this test. There is some work being done to make a substitute for this. So, and I don't know, I think there was maybe potentially one that was on the market in like Asia, because the populations of horseshoe crabs have depleted there quite a bit. But I don't think it's standard use in the US as of right now. But there are some good, I've heard very recently in the last year or so, some good like podcasts and information brought out about that synthetic version of this. So because of all of this management and because of how important horseshoe crabs are to the environment, managers need horseshoe crab data for the whole state. And of course, Florida is a very large state. There is only one person within FWC whose job it is to manage this population. And so one person can't do it all. So that's why we use citizen scientists. So in 2015, FWC, in conjunction with UF Biology and UF IFAS Sea Grant, created the Florida Horseshoe Crab Watch program in order to monitor horseshoe crabs. And we know citizen scientists have been used for lots of different projects over many, many, many years. There's actually whole organizations that look at the benefits of using citizen scientists and looking at all the projects that citizen scientists have contributed to and provided data for. So we know that this can be done and we can get good data to understand the population within Florida. So again, it started in Cedar Key in 2015. That's in Levy County, if you weren't sure. Highly recommend visiting. It's a beautiful place. And it was modeled after the Delaware's Horseshoe Crab Watch. And these are the current sites of the counties in blue that are currently participating, and we're hoping to get more of this southeast and southwest Florida, since we don't know a lot about the populations down there. But potentially, hopefully, the entire Florida coastline, we can have this program here. The program has been in Brevard County specifically since 2018. Or 2019, sorry. So this is 2020 was the second year for this program. So what do we ask our horseshoe crab volunteers to do? We ask them to do 3 main things. They do a beach nesting survey. So there's a protocol for going out to the beach at a certain time on a certain day, walking the beach, counting and documenting the number of males and females on the beach. We ask volunteers to look for tags. Tagged animals, so horseshoe crabs that have been tagged previously, because oftentimes, like I said, it's usually over a week time that at least females are coming on shore and then males come up repeatedly. So we want to see if any of those individuals that we've tagged previously are coming back to the beach to breed. And then there's a tagging portion where we actually tag individual horseshoe crabs for the tag resighting. And of course, this data is going to be used for management purposes, so we want to make sure we record with diligence. And often you get lots of questions, from the public when you're out there. So you're answering questions from the public, maybe distributing information, things like that. And we do have these cool shirts that volunteers can get to identify themselves if they want. So yeah, when horseshoe crabs come ashore to breed, that's when we do this breeding survey count. And then over time, that helps us to determine what the population looks like, how many individuals we're seeing, if we're seeing any tagged individuals. And this is done over a breeding season. So like here in Brevard County, we do it during February, March, and April. And same with other parts of the state. And on the Gulf Coast, they're actually doing some surveys around this time because they do have a good amount that come on shore to breed in the fall. And we do tag. So tagging is part of what's called in like the scientific lingo called mark recapture. And so that's where you're marking individuals and in the hopes that you'll see those individuals again. And if you don't see those individuals, then you know that the population potentially is larger, than just those individuals that you've tagged or marked in some way. And this is done in lots of different, ecological studies. And in general, we see about 8.5% to 10% of tagged animals are resighted or seen again. So not like a huge amount, but that could potentially mean that we're not at the places where the horseshoe crabs are coming ashore to breed, or the population is larger than we expect. There's formulas that go into this as to what the population size can look like. And another important thing with the tagging is we can see whether or not horseshoe crabs come back to the same beach or to different beaches. So there was this horseshoe crab that was tagged in Cedar Key Beach and was migrated northward all the way to Bald Point State Park, about 110 miles, and was sighted there. So we know they can travel far. Like I said before, we know that we see Georgia crabs sometimes in New Smyrna Beach, so we know that they can travel far, but this isn't something that we necessarily knew before, starting this program. We actually, in Brevard County, so I have 2 sites where we do this program. One is Kelly Park on Merritt Island, and one is Parish Park in Titusville, so at the very end of the Max Brewer Bridge. And we had a horseshoe crab that was tagged at Kelly Park that was later seen at Parish Park. So we knew that it traveled from Merritt Island to Titusville. I had to double check several times to make sure that was true, but it was, so.
That is cool. I do have one question. Are surveys and tagging done at a certain time of day? I know you kind of touched on this, but just to reiterate.
Yeah, so they're done whenever, so everywhere else except for here, even though we do still do the typical protocol, but the typical protocol is you go out at high tide. So whatever that time is that high tide is. So it could be in the morning, it could be the middle of the day. We don't have our citizen scientists go out when it's not light out. So it wouldn't be like in the middle of the night or when it's dark. It would be when the sun is out that you would be going. So it could be any time, basically from sunrise to sunset, depending on when high tide is during that time. In Brevard County, we do that protocol, and we also check for when onshore winds are getting up there, so when they're stronger. And so we have scientists, citizen scientists go out when the winds are blowing to see if horseshoe crabs are coming on shore to breed then. And so that, again, it would be during the daytime, so like, you know, between sunrise and sunset, but might not necessarily be when high tide is. So during the daylight, I guess is the general answer to that question. So when we are collecting this data, we're trying to, in the short term, look at beach fidelity and movement. So if horseshoe crabs are going back to the same beach or different beaches, we're looking at the number of males versus females, making sure that there's enough of both, obviously, for breeding to occur. We're looking at size differences. I don't think I said this before, but females are larger than males. So that's one way you can tell the difference. The other difference, obviously, is that males have the clasper. And then we're looking at average age. So we are kind of documenting whether they're that young, medium, or old, depending based on their shell. Again, wanting and hoping that there's young individuals coming into the population to continue with breeding. Over the long term, we want to see what the population trends look like for spawning. So whether we have a lot of young individuals, a lot of old individuals, you know, when's the best time that they come out, especially here in our part of the lagoon where we know that they don't necessarily come out, you know, during high tide. So what's that trend looking like? Are the numbers increasing or decreasing? Are they staying stable? You know, are we seeing more individuals one year, less another year? Does the mating status change over time? So like I said earlier, there's pretty much 99% of the time going to be at least a female with a male attached, but there could be satellites. So there could be any number of satellites or lots of just unattached males. So what does that look like over time? And then if there's any, what are the environmental conditions that stimulate breeding? So we know that they breed at high tide for the most part. Here in our area, they need that wind. They also need a potential particular water temperature. So like what are those conditions are that stimulate that? So I encourage you, if you ever see a tagged horseshoe crab, first of all, so this is what the tag looks like, this white disc. Oops, let me go back, sorry. And the tag will always be on the left side of the individual so that we always keep it on the same side. So that way, especially when our volunteers are going out, they know what side to look for the tag. So if you ever see a tagged horseshoe crab, please report it. This goes through the Fish and Wildlife Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They have a database that keeps track of all resightings of horseshoe crabs. So we have a better idea of that mark recapture, you know, the population. And if you ever just see a horseshoe crab, doesn't matter where you see it, whether it's on shore breeding or just even in the water, please let FWC know. So you can do that at their website. If you have like the FWC Reporter app, you could also report sightings through the mobile app. You could do a lot of other things too through that app. So I recommend downloading it. You can report things like hurt manatees and other things like that too. So there's lots of different things you can do with that FWC Reporter app. So I recommend especially if you're out in the environment a lot, to download it. But you can also report it at their website. And that gives us an idea of places where horseshoe crabs are seen, and especially if they're onshore breeding. So that potentially could be a new site for the Horseshoe Crab Watch program. And I'll send, and I think this will be a recording, and so I can give Nicole the links too. She can send out or give to you. Perfect. And that is the end of my talk. If you have any questions or have an interest in volunteering for this program, please let me know. We will be starting up again in February, going out to monitor, so doing the surveys. the last 2 years have done our training in person. We will see what happens in January, but there is actually an online training that you can do. And so you could do the presentation part online, and then we could always meet later and I can show you kind of like the practice part of doing a mock survey and, you know, all those different types of things.
And that actually ties into one question as well that we have here. It says this person said that they signed up last year and they took the class. Do they need to take another class, or does this count as a refresher?
Yeah, you don't have to take the class again. There isn't really, as I foresee right now, any changes. So there won't be any changes to the program come in the spring. So I will be in touch with everyone who has taken the class in the past, or especially the people who have volunteered, to just double check to make sure that they're still willing to volunteer. And I'll create like a Google site where like all of the documents lay and all of the scheduling lays, or is, so that you can know when to schedule, you know, sign up for a time that you want to go out. And yeah, so you don't have to take the class again, but I will be in touch in case you have any questions, or if you need a refresher, you could always do like the online virtual course if you wanted to.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. That was an awesome presentation. We do have a bunch of questions.
Okay.
We are running a little tight on our time, but we'll see what we get through. All right, so this was an interesting one. Let's see. So, really quick, how do we volunteer? Do we just email you? So yes.
Yes. Yep. Just email me and let me know you're interested, and I'll put you on my list.
Perfect. Let's see. And then we do have another one. It says, are any counts taken near Cape San Blas, Florida, near Port St. Joe?
I'm not sure. I can check with my colleagues up in that area and see. I know that they have tried to expand in that area, but I'm not sure if anyone has taken it on, but I can check. If you email me, that'll remind me to put you in touch with the coordinator, or I can contact the coordinator and ask if there's anyone there that's doing the program there.
Perfect. All right. So this one is also interesting. Do power plants cause a lot of mortalities for horseshoe crabs?
That is a great question. So yes. So there are intakes, you know, where, you know, the water comes in and then goes out, and there have been documentation of horseshoe crabs like within those intakes, and where they have to, you know, go in, clean the intakes of anything that has been stuck there. So we, one of the researchers, Jane Brockman, with this program, she's like our resident biologist. She's been researching horseshoe crabs for a really long time. She has like anecdotal data from some power plants where they have numbers, because they have to report basically what it was that they took out of the intakes. So she has numbers from those where she could say, yes, we've gotten this many horseshoe crabs at this plant and this many from another. So yes, that can occur. I don't have numbers for you as to like what the numbers look like though, because technically that's not data that can be released. So.
All right, and let's see here. So this was kind of cool. We had one person say that before they were doing their undergraduate in Delaware, and they used to tag their horseshoe crabs with pink nail polish back in the 70s.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I could see how that would be a great way to tag horseshoe crabs. That's awesome.
All right, very cool. Let's see. And looks like if you could just summarize the reasons why horseshoe crabs are important.
Yeah, so just ecologically, you know, for the ecosystem. So they feed on, you know, mollusks, so clams and worms, but a lot of different things feed on them as well. And in Delaware, like we were just talking about, during their breeding season, the fact that they are breeding and laying eggs on the shore is a very important food source for shorebirds. So particularly the threatened red knot which travels from the very southern tip of South America all the way to the Arctic to breed. So they actually, that bird species in particular stops over in Delaware specifically during the time when horseshoe crabs are laying their eggs so they could feed on the eggs. So that it's probably like the most widely studied portion of why horseshoe crabs are important, because of that ecological importance to that threatened bird species.
Very cool. Awesome. Any last questions? We are coming up on the hour. I have a question, actually.
Yeah.
Let's see. For the satellite males, do they hang out on the beach the entire time, or do they kind of like follow a male and female pair into the water?
Yeah, that's a good question. Oftentimes they'll kind of come up like unattached, so they won't be attached to anything, and they'll kind of gravitate because they do have the ability to kind of smell out using chemical cues, female. So they'll kind of be searching for, a male and a female that are attached to be able to, drop their sperm in, and they are pretty successful. So like, 25% of the time, I think it is, they are successfly, or I guess 25% of the eggs that are laid can be fertilized by satellites. So so they're just kind of out on the beach looking around and getting in the opportunity as much as they can.
Nice. Well, thank you. All right. So we have reached that 1 o'clock time. Let me just pop up the Lagoon Loyal QR code again. So for those of you that have had the chance to sign up for lagoonloyal.com, please scan the QR code. For those of you who still haven't signed up, I'll be sending a follow-up email with the QR code as well with the recorded presentation. And I'd like to give a massive thank you to Holly for that excellent presentation. We had a lot of great comments, a lot of participation. So thank you so much for sharing all that great information.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on today. I really enjoyed it. And I hope that you guys all have a better and newer and more exciting appreciation for horseshoe crabs.
I mean, they're awesome. So, well, thank you so much. We greatly appreciate it. And for everyone else, thank you as well for continuing to participate in our online Lunch and Learn webinars. So thank you so much, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. All right.